March is the handover.
Is this the handover?
And I don't quite know what. I think it's during the week when the dots change.
So you don't have your whole disco set anymore, then?
No, I just have the blue one. Then. Unless Alison keeps me around as an advisory version.
She probably will.
You feel so naked.
No, the blue one is very big. The trick is that's going to kill me.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, do you know the details of the Thursday morning thing, like what time and where?
Well,
okay,
the time is 8 o'clock, I think. Or
the time is 8. Okay.
And it's the IAB breakfast.
Right. Okay. Oh, it's probably just the IAB room there.
Yeah.
So I make slides.
Yeah, I make some slides.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's sort of this makes it easier for the IAB to follow.
Okay. Okay.
So make some slides about what's the intention, what's been happening so far, what's the plan.
Excellent.
And then you're going to get lots of questions.
Yep.
Very good. We're ready for that. Want to give it a start, Alfred? 9:30?
Yeah, I can't seem to shut this mic anyway. So, is the agenda up?
It's there on the third slide.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Monday morning, 9:30 in Seoul and many other times in many other time zones in the world. Great you are here. Great you could make it either online or in person. Welcome to the Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group. Slide change. Okay. And together here with you is me, Niels ten Hoover, and
Aubrey Doria. Oh, that's easy to read.
We have quite a full agenda ahead of us today. We had 2 presenters in mind for you, but we haven't seen them on Meet Echo yet. So probably that will move later down the queue. And we have one internet draft, the internet drafts we've been working on for quite a while, to discuss today with you.
Okay, yeah, and the other thing that we'll want to do, and just looking at the whole agenda, is so we're going to start out. By the way, we have a JabberScribe volunteer. We don't have a note taker. We do have a note taker. Thank you. So we've got both. Thank you very much. You guys have done it before. I'm very grateful for you to do it again. Then, of course, there's the note well, which I guess is on another slide, and we'll come back to it. But do I need to read that? I don't need to read that. But you guys ought to read that. Okay. Then going back to no, please go back to the agenda. So then talk about the status group and documents, which you talked about a little, context of the research. Then there's listed a presentation Q&A, but unfortunately we don't have him yet online, so we may just skip that. But if he shows up later, perhaps we can fit it in when he does show up. Then we're going to go and wanted to spend most of this session discussing the draft, which is actually, that's not the correct name of it, or did you change it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, I thought we had it as an HRPC.
Oh, that's my fault. Sorry.
Right. So it's yeah, the name is wrong there because it's HRPC. It's IETF HRPC research. So it has been, and I think it's in version 3 or 4 now, right? 4. Okay, so that needs to be changed. So we'll go through that, go through a process update. I'm shepherding the document as I'm not one of the authors, and my co-chair is one of the authors, so I would take the turn of being the hard one about trying to shepherd it. We'll go through recent changes. There have been quite a lot of changes over the last month since we started talking about doing a last call. So go through those, do a discussion of a set of issues. Then once we get through that, and really want to try and get through that to the point where we know whether it's ready to start research group last call or not. We've been close to it for a while, but I've been stalling, to be quite honest. And then see if we're ready, see if I'm ready, because you guys tell me I'm ready. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the related work that's being done in some other groups that mostly Niels and somewhat myself, a little bit in ICANN, have been working on that relates to this work, just to put this in a larger context. Then an open discussion if there are any other drafts or papers or ideas that people want to discuss. Does anybody at this point have anything, a draft, a paper, an idea that they're working on that they'd like to discuss in this meeting? I don't see any hands on that, so I'll assume they're not, but perhaps ideas will generate during the meeting and someone will come up with an idea when we get there. Then the next thing is the next steps. One of the things we've got is Niels and I have an IAB appearance this week to talk about the group, what it's doing, and where it's going. And since this draft is hitting an annealing point, is hitting a point at which we're going to try and get it published, basically want to have a conversation about where we go from here. We have some ideas about what we want to do, but definitely want to discuss them with the group and see what people think. And then any other business. Does anybody have anything that we should stick under any other business at this point, knowing that it's coming? I'll ask again later. Okay then, so that does that. Then go to the, just so people can see the note well again. You know, it's, has everybody read it? Has anybody not read it and need a description of it? Okay, so assume it as read. Going on. So then, where are we? No, well, okay. So this is document quality, relies on reviews. So please review documents in your working groups, at least one other document from another working group. Several people have reviewed our documents, so I'm quite happy about that. And if you'd like documents you care about reviewed, put the effort in to review other documents. Announcement made. Okay, then here is, yeah, I'm still looking at the previous one. So here is a outline of the group's history, starting in 2014 and moving through to where we are now, where in July, basically we put out a research draft, road test reviews, there have been talks, there's been various revisions of it, and a new research draft was put out, in fact, just last night, but one was also put out before then. Since it became a research group draft, it's been through several revisions based on discussions in the research group. So that has actually been quite good. Okay. So here is the context and objective of the research group. It's to expose the relationship between protocols and human rights with a focus on the rights to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. But based on some comments that we got at the beginning that we shouldn't strictly restrict ourselves to just these two, given the interrelationship of human rights, we have not defined discussion of other rights as out of scope, and they have come up on occasion. To propose guidelines to protect the internet as a human rights enabling environment in future protocol development in a manner similar to the work done for privacy considerations in RFC 6973. So we've tried to basically follow their example, and in fact at the last meeting had a discussion of not only the example, but of some of the after effect of offering such considerations to try and make sure that we are working in a reasonable context. And then to increase the awareness in both the human rights community and the technical community on the importance of the technical workings of the internet and its impact on human rights. And this is one of the things that I'll come back to when we're talking about how we move forward with the draft. We've gotten some context going in the technical community, and hopefully the last call will bring in more of that. We've had a few people from the human rights community review this, but want to go further during the last call to get more of the human rights community brought into this, because obviously only a few of the technically oriented human rights communities come to these meetings, and do want to do more outreach to them going forward. Okay, and the next one, and it's the context of the research, you know, and basically going back to this document to, I have to bring up the slide so I could see it since it's behind me, to RFC 3935, you know, the statement there that the internet isn't value neutral and neither is the IETF. And so building on that and building, okay, so what are our values and how do we contribute and work with those? That is part of the context of this. Now at this point, we're supposed to go into Jeffrey Bowker's presentation, but we don't have that. And we don't have him, right? As far as I can tell, we do not have him. So we'll skip that. And as I say, should he come online later in the meeting, we'll try and bring him in to the session later. I do not know what's happening there. So that brings us to the next thing, which is discussion of draft IRTF Hrpc research. Yeah, the URL needs to be the correct one, but that was put in the Jabber room, but it's IRTF Hrpc research. Should get you there. And I've been the document shepherd on it, and the authors are Niels and Corinne Kath. I don't know. I don't think she's here, is she?
She is.
She is here.
She is in the meet echo room.
Hello, Corinne. Basically, I think the next thing is to turn it over to them to discuss, but I just want to discuss a little bit on the on my view of it from the shepherding basis. At the last meeting, there was a consensus taken by Niels, I wasn't in the meeting, that it was ready. I balked a little bit at that, given that there were some more reviews that had some open comments, and so basically went into a mode of preparing for research group last call, but not actually making it there. Niels has worked very hard with several of the reviewers, including Stephen Farrell, who did a very detailed review of the document and trying to basically close all of the issues there. There's the impression now that the issues may be closed, but want to basically just walk through them during this meeting to make sure that they are before starting that call. I don't intend to make it a short call. I intend to make it at least a month, partly because I want to send it to some of the human rights groups and some of the academic community that knows about this work but hasn't been following it closely. The work has been reported in other contexts. It's been reported in the Internet Governance Forum. It's been reported on in ICANN. It's been reported on in IEEE. It's been talked about in various human rights circles, but we haven't actually gone to them and asked them to do a detailed reviewing of it. And as part of the audience that this document, I hate the word audience, but part of the group that this document is intended for, it's intended for the technical community, but it's also intended for the human rights community, and want to make sure that it's in a document that is understandable by both of those communities going forward, and that it makes sense to them. So calling this a research group last call could very well be a last call. It could very well also be the first of several last calls, depending on the comments we make. And I wanted to put that out there as the first document in this topic area. Really want to make sure that we come out with a document that is understandable and you know, clear to those reading it. And I've apologized to Niels a couple times for being hard-nosed about this, but that's really what I'm hoping we achieve with this. So there's a, yeah, why don't you take over now talking about your document? Right, okay.
I'll take off my co-chair hat and go back into author mode. So happy to discuss this document with you all. We've been working on this now for about 1.5 years. We had about 10 versions. We started off with separate documents that now finally merged. This is not the most actual thing because last night, midnight, when submission opened, we submitted version 04. What we try to do in this draft is actually do some things that we have in the objective of our research group, namely research the relationship between human rights and protocols, and if possible, provide a model for guidelines to properly balance the relationship between human rights and protocols. That is what we've been doing. How do we went about it? We started, of course, with reading RFCs and doing this not necessarily as engineers, but more like archaeologists, to try to understand what rights are already embedded in the documents and try to find shreds and sediments of rights language in there. We first did that manually, realized over 7,000 and now over 8,000 RFCs no, is a bit much to read all and to scan all in great detail. So we automated that a bit and worked on that with a Python tool, which was initially made by Sebastian Benthal and Nick Doty. And we made some improvements on that. We've been working on that. Then we went in through academic literature, where there's a very interesting debate on this as well. And it's interesting to see that the academic debate and the debate in the IETF do not necessarily converge. So that is definitely a sub-objective that then became also part of the draft to connect the discussions and the findings of these two different communities, which fits very well in the IRTF methinks. Then we understood that from reading and automated analyzing alone, we did not get all the details because we did not really understand how some things were intended. So that when in IETF 92 in Dallas, we set off and interviewed 25 of you and did so in quite a lot of detail for over an hour, after 1.5 hours, to understand what sentiments and ideas there were on human rights and protocols. While we were doing that, we also made that into a film that you can see at hrpc.io. It is full Creative Commons, so feel free to redistribute or edit or do it as you like. Then we found that some specific protocols had an impact on human rights, but we wanted to document that. So for that, we went into doing case studies. And so we did case studies on IP, DNS, XMPP, VPN, peer-to-peer, and all documented that in the drafts. And then combining that, the relation, the impact of protocols on rights, we came up with a set of guidelines. And that set of guidelines, we then tested with the help of Giovanni and Shane on seeing how is this helpful for people who are actually developing an internet draft. So that is a bit the history of the document. And in total, we've had 17 versions with the different iterations of the document. We had over 10 reviews of people, so a lot of thanks for all the eyeballs and the great criticism and reviews from that. Also, thanks for Avri for actually breaking us down or holding us back a bit, because with every review, I have to say it has gotten better, so that's really good. And I still managed to get a lot of typos out in there, so reviews are always needed. 786 mails on the draft and 540 commits on Git and 67 pages. That is a bit sad, also nice, also sad, also nice, also sad. But that's where we are, and I think what it does, it is a really strong documentation of the process and the research, really clearly linking the research to the guidelines and the outcomes, so that everyone can understand how we got there, and that it is not just a value statement made by the research group. So what have we actually been doing since IETF 96? Well, there is the two big centers of change were two very elaborate reviews. One by Amelia Andersdotter that was done off list, and one by Stephen Farrell, which has played out in the last months on the list. I think we have addressed and maybe even satisfied most of Stephen's comments, but since Stephen is a jabberoom, I will not speak for him. I will give you a short overview of what we've been doing. We moved the guidelines to the top. They were at the end of the document because they were the consequence of all the research, but we had comments from Stephen that were then supported by two people in the draft that it should be put up. So if that's what the people want, then we put it on top, and we have explained it why it's on top and that they flow from the research that is underneath. An argument pro is that it's not likely that someone is going to scroll down 60 odd pages to come to arrive at the guidelines. The con argument is that the guidelines logically follow from the research, so that's why they should be at the bottom. But nah, I stopped feeling strongly about it. So it's where we all think it should go. It should go. We changed all the mentions of the internet architecture because we do not necessarily need to repeat the discussion whether there is one internet architecture or whether there are many and whether we have consensus on that. So we mostly changed that into the architecture of the networks that together make up the internet, or internet architectures, to move around that discussion that has already been sufficiently documented. Remove the definition of information security. We were getting a bit into a rabbit hole on that, and while we were trying to fix the definition, we saw we only use it in the glossary part and we don't really use it in the rest of the document. So why don't just ditch it, make it easier? And I think this is happening now a lot. We see that we came up with a lot of concepts and a lot of ideas, and right now we're streamlining it back to really the core of what it is. So we removed the definition. There were the diagrams, and this pained me because we had a lot of the formulas linking technical concepts to rights. People found the diagrams a bit confusing because the relation between the technical concepts and the rights concepts was not made extremely explicit or very clear. So now it's made into a table, and that seems to be a good consensus that we had in the middle. If you've been on the list, you've seen quite a lot of discussion on DDoS attacks, which have become even more relevant now again, but in a bit another light than we discussed. We started the DDoS discussion as under the premise, can a DDoS be seen as a use of the right to protest, of the right of peaceful assembly and association? We had a very long discussion on that, and we then came to the conclusion an attack is an attack is an attack is an attack. So that even people who might use DDoS as a tactic would probably not be for sanctioned DDoS attacks, and the IETF would be unable to see what would be a legitimate or a proportionate DDoS attack and what is not, so it would not make sense to sanction anything. So we came actually to the conclusion that was already made in another RFC, that an attack is an attack is an attack is an attack. But we took quite a long way, or quite a long discussion to get there. We summarized the discussion and we found out that that might have been a bit too long, so we cut that all back, and I think now it's quite clear. We added introductory text on human rights because we spend much more time on talking about technical protocols than explaining what human rights exactly are, based on the specific treaties and the bodies and how things can be balanced, and whether a specific technology can be a human right or not. So we've added text on that to ensure that there would be no confusion, even for the most literal of readers. Yes. So then we radically shortened the abstract and moved quite some of the text of the abstract into the introduction. We improved the content agnosticism definition. There's an S missing there. To ensure that there would be no misunderstanding between content and payload, because some people said that the packet header can also be seen as content. So that we made it really clear, we reduced it to payload. We removed pejorative terms on governments or companies that might be involved with a certain behavior. So we tried to keep the text as clean as possible. And then there were many, many smaller changes which can be found back either in the Git repo or on the list, because there we had over 100 changes when it comes to small things that were addressed, and lots of typos. They keep on being there. It's a pain, but we're getting there. So what did we not do? And these are good concepts for discussion. So we talk quite a lot, or we talk a bit about anonymity and the right to be anonymous. And we think that this is a really good part in the draft, because it is both a juridical term that has been used by the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, but it's also a technical term. So this is one of the few cases where we actually have a bridging concept. But then we also have the problem that many experts agree that anonymity is an extremely hard technical concept to achieve online. So should we keep this in here as an aspirational goal and as a bridging concept, or should we fall back to other notions such as not being tracked, or having a reasonable understanding of what data of you is being shared? We think that having the second part, that replacing it with something else, would be much weaker and much less clear. So that's why we would like to opt for keeping anonymity in there. I realize now that Corinne is on the call, and I would also really like to have her voice in these discussions. So maybe I can, if we,
Yeah.
Is Corinne in the queue?
I don't know.
Corinne, can you add yourself to the queue there? Can I? Oh, yes, there you are. Great. So feel free to add anything if I'm saying something stupid, or if you have something.
Also, before Corinne goes, I'm wondering whether on each of these things, it'd be worth, after Corinne speaks, opening the queue and seeing if there are comments, as opposed to waiting before we've gone through all of the issues that may have a discussion point.
Yeah, no, so far, good morning, everyone in Seoul. So far, the only thing that I had to add was perhaps a little bit of explanation as to what we did with the discussion on protocols or politics. But is that happening later on, Niels, or do you want to do that now?
That's the next point. So we're first now seeing whether anyone has any opinion, either weak, small, or suggestion or comment on the anonymity point.
So in other words, there's general comfort with leaving it, with not making the change, is kind of what I'm trying to tell at the moment, since that was one of the comments that came through.
One comment from Gabber is that anonymity is currently not well described in the documentation.
I think we have several parts in the glossary that write about what anonymity is. If you would like more detail on which part, it would be great to understand where you would like more detail. And if so, text suggestions would also be very much appreciated.
Do we have any other comments? If not, so that's basically one note. Oh, okay, there is more. Okay, thanks.
The interesting question is whether or not to say anonymity is a goal or not. Given its difficulty, it is not, in my opinion.
Well, I think we never have we never stopped because something was hard, right? None of this was actually easy, and I think that it's hard. It's exactly the reason why we should try it, because we should not give up. I think just being something difficult is not a reason to not do it at all.
Can I ask a question, which is there a difference between, certainly it's an aspiration, but does making it a goal somehow make it harder? Does somehow making it a goal says it's something we can achieve? Something you call an aspiration is something you hope you can figure out how to achieve. Something you call a goal, perhaps, and I don't want to put my words in Stephen's mouth, is something you think you can achieve. So I don't know whether there's any difference in that and whether that might help with the language at all in any way. I'm asking you, I'm asking Stephen, I'm basically looking at this and sort of trying to help us find an answer that would work. And I also see that Andrew Sullivan had said he agreed it's not harder as a goal, it's impossible as ever. And Andrew agreeing with that. Whereas aspirations can be impossible.
So, but that would be quite interesting, actually, that both the that if we would drop the whole idea of striving to achieve anonymity on the internet, I think that would be quite a loss. And so, saying the complete opposite thing would, I think, be quite an architectural stance that I did not expect, actually.
Relaying Stephen Farrell, I think the problem is that some folks don't get just how hard anonymity might be, possibly beyond a useful goal, like faster than light travel.
So this is Andrew Sullivan. Just to expand on what I was saying in the Jabber room, I agree with Stephen that anonymity is really hard, the way that Stefan just nicely relayed. But we do have two citations there, two RFCs that are, as far as I understand, consensus products of the IETF. So it seems to me that you've got consensus documents that have already defined these things. You can use those terms, and then you can say, well, this is a goal. Of course, the fact of the matter is that, you know, the definition of those terms is such that you probably couldn't actually achieve them if you attempted it, might be a consideration. And I think that that's what I'm agreeing with Stephen.
This is DKG. I agree that anonymity is very hard to get right. I don't actually think that it is a entirely Boolean construct. We can make things harder for people who are trying to de-anonymize other people. And removal of it as a goal or removal of discussion seems like it would be totally missing the point for this particular project. We do have stuff that tries to let people be indistinguishable from others on the network, and we should encourage that. It is hard.
Yeah, so what I take from this is that we indeed have other documents saying things on this, and I think we already referenced them. And I might be able to add some language on the difficulty, and the comment by DKG that it's indeed not binary, and that we can take steps towards, and then referencing also the pervasive monitoring work, which says that the protocols will always leak information, but we can seek to minimize it. So I could add something like that. Would that work?
David Summers Harris from Ruckton. Maybe a good analogy might be like encryption, how I don't think anybody expects that encryption will ever achieve 100% protection of data. So if there's an understanding that it will always be an ongoing thing, it's not a goal which maybe someday we will figure out how to achieve, but it is a race sort of that we will always be running and never end. That might be a little bit more realistic and put things into perspective of how to tackle the problem.
From Stephen Farrell, he said that anonymity is a fine goal, but the non-trackability also. So sorry, NIMITY.
Like, what is a fine goal?
He does go on, right?
Yeah, NIMITY includes pseudonymity and not just anonymity. So it's an umbrella term, if I understand correctly.
We already have pseudonymity also as one of the possible objectives in the draft. So
This is Andrew Sullivan again, and I don't want to put any words into Stephen's mouth because Lord knows that'd be a bad idea. But I think the point that he's striving at here is a subtle one, and maybe one that is not entirely captured in the document now that I'm seeing this argument going on. And that is, there are a lot of cases where you say, well, I want anonymity, and that sounds like a great goal, but without a scoping for the purpose, you don't actually understand what it means. And so if the document then recommended that when you made these considerations, you actually scoped what anonymity meant in your case. What is the acceptable point at which data leakage would happen, or is there no acceptable point at which data leakage would happen, or whatever? That would be a concrete advice that you could offer to people making human rights protocol consideration decisions that could be useful. And I think that may be the, I don't know if this is what's motivating Stephen, but it actually strikes me that this is useful advice that this document could give.
This is DKG. I think that's reasonable, Andrew. I also think not just saying what could leak, but to whom it could leak. Right, but this is no different from the security considerations that we expect from our RFCs, right? I mean, we talk about security considerations not as though, well, every protocol must be 100% secure. We say, make sure you're aware of who your threats are and what the trade-offs are, and so it sounds very similar to me. This is not something. They're both really hard.
And this is and to echo that, what we're trying to do here is we just have guidelines and a questionnaire to get people thinking, right? We're not saying must, should, may anonymity. This is just we're asking questions whether people have thought about data minimization and anonymity, etc. So we're never saying anywhere anonymity must.
It's Andrew again, and at the risk of beating the stain where the horse used to be, I think all of that is right, and I think the key point is that it may not be that subtlety may not be completely captured in the text as it stands, and so if and it might actually just be that at the top there's like one sentence, and maybe I can send some text because I don't have it at the top of my head, but roughly to the effect, look, these are all going to be traded off, and perfection is something that you're not going to be able to achieve, and you better be prepared to to accept that kind of fact, because I think there's a certain categorical flavor to some of the text here that maybe is what, I don't know if it's what's itching Stephen, but it is what has made me itchy on a few occasions, and I didn't really understand it until I listened to this.
Okay, so we've already added text on the balancing of rights there, but if you have a sentence, I'd be more than happy to have a look at that. And yeah, I really hope, because in a lot of discussions with Stephen, it also took a while for me to really understand what he meant. So feel free to keep on iterating and understanding, because often it's more of an understanding issue than that we're complete in disagreement here.
I see no more at the mic, so I've taken down a note that sort of language needs to be reviewed and tightened before the last call on this particular issue. Maybe just the addition of a sentence or something, but that's the note I've written down. I see from your face that it's not a good note, but
well, whether we do it before or during, but that's your call.
Thank you.
Next point. Oh, that point might take a while. Do we want to take that point
Yes,
now?
no, I think we should take these points and
Boom.
basically discuss them. We lost a speaker, you know, and we got more time than we asked for on this meeting. So I think it's good to talk through these issues and see where we are.
Yeah.
Yep. You know, if it's too hot with the hat, you can take
There
the
we
hat
go.
off.
Corinne. Okay, so we have the statement in the draft, and we've had long discussions about this in the on the list as well. But this remains a fun point to discuss because I think this is a strong conviction of the authors that protocols are political, because protocols have an effect on the ordering of society, which increasingly mediate our lives. So this is a point we would really want to keep in the draft. It has been contested by some. Stephen has suggested that it needs a qualifying language to work. So some protocols are political, and for us as authors, that does not really make sense. So this might also depend on your definition of political, but I'm more than happy to discuss that here.
It's Andrew Sullivan again, and I think I said this like really some months ago in a meeting and also on the list. The reason that I hate this claim in the document is that basically it doesn't have any argument for it. I mean, you state it over and over again, and there's several places where you say, oh, well, these things are linked to things that people are doing in here. But none of that actually provides an argument that there is a fundamental fact about the protocol that means that it is necessarily a political instrument. I mean, there's a long history in the philosophy of technology that basically argues this point. You know, there's a whole book by Heidegger about this very point, and there's lots and lots of other literature about it. But none of that is in here. And you could just skip all of that by saying we take this stance and incorporate that and say this is the stance we're taking. But you don't do that either. Instead, the document just sort of says, well, this is true, doesn't provide an argument for it, but says it over and over again, and then uses this as the stance from which the document proceeds. If you take the stance, which I do not necessarily, but I understand, that actually protocols are essentially value neutral, and it's only the social context into which they are placed that turns them political by virtue of their embeddedness in that cultural context rather than the protocol itself, you get a very different result from this. Now, you know, I don't think that this document is going to be made better by fully exploring this set of rat holes. We've got 2,000 odd years of philosophy that have already explored this, and they haven't come to a conclusion either. So I doubt that this RFC is going to do it. But it does seem to me that you can't just state this and as a working assumption without making it explicit, that really we're just going to assume this, and if you reject this point of view, you might reject the rest of the document.
Can I chime in there really quickly? Yes.
Corinne?
You're breaking up, but it would be good to have you speak to this.
Let me know if the audio is good. So thanks for your point, Andrew. That's a good thing to know. I think one of the reasons why we have.
I don't think it's just me, but I cannot understand. Is there an audio person here that can help get it working better? Oh, it's just the network.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Great. I just switched off the video, which makes a huge difference.
Aye.
So I just wanted to quickly thank Andrew for his point. It's good to know that this isn't something that's clear enough in the document. So one of the reasons why we actually haven't made very explicit this argument is because we refer to a whole body of literature that does that. But
everybody is shaking their heads to the clear enough question. I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, perhaps you can write it and we can read it out, or
I will
get a better connection, I guess. Because
perfect.
So I'll maybe
you can start the argument.
I'll start.
in the not relying Klaber, personal opinion. I think that the fact that protocols are political is not just a strong conviction of the author, it's the entire point of this research group. Because if they are not, what are we really doing here? The point that Andrew made is that, or Stephen also made on the Klaber, is not all protocols are political, or a protocol choice is not always political. That's true, but often it is. So I don't think that we never claim that all protocols are political and that it's always political to choose to retrieve your email over POP or IMAP, for instance. But very often they are, and they have consequence. And in my opinion, this is something that should not be removed because it's the corner of the, it's a main pillar of the work behind this research group.
I'd like to respond to Andrew's things because there were a lot of things in there that I really did not understand. First of all, I do think that there's a lot of argumentation on this point in the draft, including a whole literature review showing the different discussions of this point, how different authors have dealt with it, specifically towards protocols. So saying that we simply make this statement and do not provide any argumentation is misleading at the least. Secondly, I think we must have been reading a very different philosophy, or been reading the philosophy in a very different way, because I think that there is actually, especially when we read Heidegger, and Heidegger who is problematic in his own ways, when he talks about technology, is that technology is always already embedded in the environment and is always zu handen, and that we cannot think of it outside of its embedded context. So thinking that a protocol is neutral in Heidegger seems for me like a complete logical fallacy. But if we then continue to more modern thinkers, both within computer science and the humanities, I think there's hardly anyone left who would say that protocols are either value neutral nor that they are not political. And even we had our own RFC saying that the internet isn't value neutral, and neither is the IETF. So I think we have a lot of support for this work in the history of philosophy, in RFCs, and I think also in the literature and argumentation of this draft.
This is Andrew again. So first of all, I want to re-emphasize the point that I was making at the very end of my previous remarks, which is that I don't really think that this document needs to settle those questions. It needs instead to be quite clear that it is taking a position. And all of your literature review here is in fact in support of the view that technologies are in some way political. You don't actually review any of the literature that talks about that talks about the stance of the stance of the view from nowhere. Now, like, I have a metaphysics background. I understand, what's problematic about all those things and everything like that. And we could be boring everybody else by discussing it all day, but I don't think that that's useful for this document. What I think this document needs to do is state explicitly that this is a position you're taking, and then your literature review actually serves you nicely, because what it does is it shows, look, this is in a long tradition that is consistent with this, rather than needing to review all of the other literature, which I know you've just said there doesn't exist, but there does. That instruments are purely instruments, and the instrumentality inheres in the cultural thing. I agree with you that Heidegger, for instance, doesn't think that instruments can come into being outside of a cultural context. Probably Wittgenstein doesn't either. But I mean, we've got a long tradition of people who are that sort of positivist view. And there's the sort of Mr. Dr. Science guy, philosophy of science people who all think that. And I think that sort of tradition is there. And if you're going to engage with it, you're going to end up having to make this document much more bloated, and you don't need that. So that's the difficulty that I have here. Finally, the reference actually to the mission statement of the IETF is extremely problematic on this, because it does say that the internet is not value neutral, and it doesn't say anything about what its values are. Maybe its values are in fact pure neutrality among any stance that you could take, and there is no such view in the internet as human rights. That is a position that at least one, fairly subtle thinker, I think, around the IETF has taken about this, about the nature of the internet. I think it's tricky position to hold, but I think it is a possible position that is consistent also with the mission statement of the IETF. Again, the main point that I'm trying to make is that you don't need all of that if you just state exactly what Stefan was saying only moments ago. This is a foundational stance that you're taking as part of this work. You've got this literature, that you can point to that says, here's how you found that kind of thing, and then you're done. And you don't have to have, you could actually shorten some of the literature, some of the discussion of the literature and the survey of the literature, maybe for the purposes of a research group document. That's not worth it. But I just think that if you take it as an assumption and make it explicit, rather than try to argue that you're founding this in some kind of objectivity, it'll be easier.
Andrew, can I ask a question? Given that it's a research group document and the discussion of this does have two sides, would it also be reasonable to include some of the other discussion that you're saying is not there? And say what you said, that it was indeed, a position being taken here because of this, and that there is a counter position and such. I was just wondering.
I think you could do that, but I think that people who are going to read the RFC series aren't going to read all of that. That's really what this comes down to, right? That I want this to be a document that is useful for the target reader. And it seems to me that the target reader, given the series that this is being published in, mostly doesn't care about that kind of stuff, right? I mean, weirdos like us who are interested in the sort of philosophical traditions behind all this might be fun for us, but like we already know where to look up the rest of those things, and I think the rest of the people probably won't.
In quick response to Andrew, even though this is bound not to be quick, right? So it's like I fully agree that we don't need to go back to Aristotle, to Techne and Hippokaimenon to make a case around this. But when you say that you think we have selectively discussed literature, I think that would be a problem if that would be the case. So I would really appreciate it if you could share some literature that says technology is neutral. And I'm very happy to have that, to add that to the literature section. And again, that doesn't need to be 1,000 years of the history of philosophy reviewed, but a few papers. We're happy to summarize and link them and to show the choices that we make through the research and balance that. So I hope we can do that. And the statement you made that I really do not understand, and I would love to understand it, is that how you would make the point the internet isn't value neutral, but actually it is. I find that a very, well, I need to study a lot of hermeneutics to get there, so I find it quite a stretch to make that point that is how we should read the mission statement of the IETF. And I also do not necessarily think that is in the line of how that document is written, which I do think takes a stance. Not a very elaborate, not a very precise one, and that's exactly what we've been trying to build on, right? To find out what do we actually mean when we say such things.
Hi, I'm Paul Wilson. I'm from APNIC. I don't get to IETF very often these days, and I haven't followed this discussion closely, so I'm not going to offer anything about the statement that protocols are political, but I'm genuinely wondering if some consideration has been given to how this statement would be read, how it could be understood or misunderstood or interpreted to, cast some interpretation or some assertion over the whole protocol development process, the whole IETF. I mean, if protocols are political, then is IETF a political organization? I mean, there are a whole bunch of questions and implications that seem to follow from this. And as such a stark statement, I really think, personally, I think there's a risk of it being used in a way that we might not intend or want. And it may be, for the sake of clarity, regardless of the correctness of the position, it may be better to qualify this and say that it's the application, it's the configuration of protocols that can be political, because otherwise, as I say, it's a very stark statement and it could be taken in all sorts of ways and it could be used. So has that been considered?
Yes, we have. So it's not that we have this as a banner on top of the internet draft, right? I think it is pretty much embedded within these discussions, within literature reviews, and I think one of the speakers at the previous HRPC session, namely the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, said that protocol development touches upon politics, and if we do not come up with our own position on that, it's more likely that other people will come in and make that position for us. So this is more a kind of a risk assessment strategy to know and to show for us how we relate to human rights, to ensure, because we see this discussion also going on in the ITU WTSA, and then exactly as an argument for government intervention. So if we do not have a understanding of how we see how our work impacts that, then it could be an argument for people that are not us to say IETF should or must, or we should take authority away from that because they do not have a position or understanding of that. So I think it's very strongly based in in that line of thinking.
Two thoughts, and this is me trying to interpret things, so people tell me if I'm wrong. I think when Andrew points to the is not value neutral is a meta statement, and so one could say it is not value neutral, its value is neutrality. I mean, basically, when you're talking in statements like that, you do have those two possible levels of understanding. And I'm also wondering whether the way you quoted the rapporteur's comment on political relation, political aspect, may actually be part of a way of bridging the discussion, as opposed to saying protocols are political. His statement was somewhat more diplomatic.
But so I start to get the point, I think, but I'm a bit slow. It's do we mean that the outcome should be neutrality, so that our human rights impact should be neutral or positive and not negative? Is that
well, neutral? The judgment is perhaps, but yeah. But anyhow,
one
yeah.
more comment from Stephen Farrell, that the internet is not the protocols. I personally add that it probably means that we should distinguish protocols are political, implementations are political, and the internet, how it is deployed, is also political. In my opinion, all are political, but they are not the same thing.
Yeah, and we should definitely not try to fix everything here. We cannot and we should not. And this should also definitely not expand the scope and the mission of the IETF. We should, and I think that's also in the document, that within our work, we should clearly see that we do not have an adverse impact on human rights. It doesn't mean we should go to other fora and proselytize there. No, we should just ensure that within our work, we should respect human rights.
Okay, any more discussion on this? So this looks like another piece that needs to be at least touched and tuned a little bit, and you'll accept that in terms of going forward. Perhaps a little bit about there being other literature, not necessarily going into depth on other literature. Perhaps some aspects of what, you know, the softening of the statement, as it were. I don't know.
Well, softening, I'm not sure, because I would definitely not like to add the qualifying statement. But if the position you just offered, that neutrality is that we should not have a negative impact, then I can live with that. And if Andrew says that is okay, and if Andrew says he'll share some literature then I would be very happy to add that, because I might be in my own literature filter bubble.
Okay. But would you nod your head? No, you shook your head. Okay. So I'll have to look at that language a little and before moving on. Thanks.
Okay, now to some lighter points. So in our case discussion of XMPP and its impact on rights, we haven't discussed OTR. And it has been suggested on list, well, why don't we go a bit into more, into an understanding of encryption protocols, of messaging, and yeah, then we get into OMIMO, and then we get into Axolotl, which there was Signal, and a re-implementation of the Signal protocol in Rust, and the open standards problems of that. And that was definitely a rabbit hole that I did not want to get into. So we've left a case study of XMPP to XMPP and did not add anything that can be slapped on top of that. So, but it seems that people are okay with that. If people do feel strongly about it, I'm very happy to add a part in that if people also are happy to write it, because it is non-trivial to where it starts and where it stops, right? And before you know it, but it's going to be a suggestion for further work, you're going to be discussing the theories and realities between federation and centralization, and which I think is an excellent topic for a draft, but adding that to the current 67 pages, I'm not sure if that is wise or helping the scope of the document. I'm very happy you feel the same.
Okay, I don't see anybody at the microphone, so we can assume that not do was okay. I see heads nodding, so okay. Thanks.
Okay, the next point I expect will be, it should be, it's not localization, it's internationalization. So we've been working on internationalization, and if you were with us I think 2 IETFs ago, we had a presentation from Ramzi Nasser, who showed by producing a programming language in Arabic how it pretty much broke everything, ranging from GitHub to parsers, etc. We got a lot of feedback and a lot of retweets.
If I may interrupt you, Stefan Bortsmeyer speaking, it's a good example of the difference between the protocol, the implementation, the deployment, because in this talk you are talking about, I think that the author mixed everything. Which was one of the weaknesses of his otherwise excellent talk.
Fully agree. Fully agree. One of the gists of his talk was that if we make the working language of the internet English, then it's saying to every non-English speaker or every speaker whose English is not the first language, this is not your network. This is not the network where you belong. You're just a guest. So that's why we've taken the internationalization part a bit more radical than some people would do, and have asked for internationalization not only of the user-facing parts, because we do think that developers are also human, and that that the protocol part should also be able to be internationalized to provide for other language options. So because that is not a position that is generally held within localization or always adopted, I thought I'll bring it up here. And I see Andrew is coming.
Hi, Andrew Sullivan. This was a thing that I was a little bit worried about once before, but I didn't send a comment about it to the mailing list. But now that you've posted in 04, I guess I'm going to complain. The concern that I have, I mean, I think the approach that you're taking is completely fatuous, to be perfectly honest with you, but you could take it. I don't care. I'm more concerned about the fact that this use of localization and internationalization is not actually consistent with the rest of the IETF practice around this, because we have always insisted that localization and internationalization considerations are exclusively about stuff that leaks out to users, and that things inside the protocol do not need internationalization or localization. And in fact, the guidance from the IAB traditionally has been that things that are protocol only really must be ASCII only. And the reason for that has to do with simplicity and other engineering values that are unrelated to this. So to the extent that you're promoting anything outside of that, you're actually proposing something that is very much against you know, a number of standards track documents, and of course also a bunch of IAB guidance. And I think that that is somewhat problematic. And I don't care if you leave it in and say, you know, this is contrary to advice and so on, but I think that needs to be explicit.
The way I read the current version, Stefan Bartmeyer speaking, sorry. The way I read the current version of the draft, it does not propose to change the traditional IETF policy on character set and language and so on. It just mentions the fact that this was a choice and other choice could have been possible. And the choice which was made, which in my opinion was the right one, has political consequences. So the idea, the research group is not in charge of changing the IAB policy or IETF policy and character sets and language, just to point out that there was a decision at the time and other decision could have been possible, and the one which was taken had consequences.
And that's probably, and the reason why that choice was made was probably because it was from made by an English-speaking community, not thinking about other languages and its consequences, right? So it's just showing the implications of those choices and not saying you should necessarily change that, but just getting the thoughts going about the implications that that kind of choices have.
So this is Andrew, and I'm not gonna beat this one either, but I will say that Stefan's interpretation there is one that I can accept. So I'm going to withdraw what I said before.
This is Avri asking, do you feel that the language that's in the draft now, Stefan especially, who made the comment, but also Andrew, is sufficient to convey that? I think it probably is, but I'm wondering if you think it's sufficient to convey that. And then please, sorry.
Hi, I'm Dirk Kutschei. I share with Andrew's view on this. So isn't this actually more a problem of tools, really? So instead of, you know, protocol specifications, because I think the issues that people mostly have is that, you know, codings have problems and compilers and so on. And instead of, I mean, is there any problem with, like, for example, ASCII protocol specifications, really?
Yes, a lot.
Okay.
And that's with the UTF-8 versus ASCII. We have some links on that in the document, and it has to do with different character sets. And limiting it to ASCII might get you into a lot of problems with different character sets, especially non-Latin languages.
A comment from Stephen Farrell. The internationalization language in the current draft, in my opinion, goes beyond IETF consensus. Only doing that deliberately would be better. No, sorry. And the last comment from Stephen Farrell was ignore the previous one. Sorry, I missed the last one.
Excellent.
Yeah, so actually there were two comments. So the last one, the one I spoke about, was the right one. Good.
Excuse me, this is Avri. I don't understand what he means by only doing that deliberately would be better.
I think what he's saying is, this is DKG, I think Stephen is saying, sorry Stephen, this is the second person to put words in your mouth here, is that while it does go beyond IETF and IAB consensus, it's fine to do that if you do it deliberately and say this is beyond the traditional consensus.
I can do that. I'm happy to add a sentence like, whereas this and this is agreed in RTF consensus in this document, we also think that.
Okay, so seeing nobody else at the line and no new comments on, yes, and Stephen did say, this is Aubrey speaking again, DKG was correct. And then just going back, his mouth is full and don't do it by accident. Okay, so I'll put this one down as a third one where some clarifying language needs to be added before. Okay, great, thanks. And now to the last one.
Yeah, some people have suggested to move the guidelines to another document. I think that would be wrong because the guidelines are specifically a product of the research. So I don't think they should be seen or discussed separately. If we want to make the guidelines into more formal, where I do not think we are now, I do not think they should be done within Hrpc. That would then fit either as a BCP or as an IAB statement, like the privacy guidelines, or even stronger, as a product of a working group in the IETF Gen area. So I do think that the guidelines are where they are now. Whether we have that in the beginning or at the end, or at the end of the document, I'll leave that up to you. Just tell me what to do and I'll put it wherever you think it should be.
Going to the microphone, Aubrey Doria, simply because this is purely a personal opinion. The decision was left to me and I've been trying to stay away from mine. Basically, I was one of those who argued with you from the beginning that they did not belong in the document, and I found them confusing. I've come to accept kind of that, okay, they're fine in the document, especially toned down. But it was confusing when I was reading this last version, the 3 bits, not the 4, to have them come up front like that. Basically, before any discussion, before any, you know, what is this about? Now, that had been one of Stephen's proposals, and to put them up front because that's where, if anybody's going to read them and use them, that's all they're going to read. While I think that they are the beginning of another good document, I see that perhaps putting them in an appendix or an after that says, here is a model. Discuss that there is a model, but not actually make it part of, I mean, have it there as an appendix. It's easily removable and usable without reading the rest of the document. But as I said, this is a personal opinion. And since this was made a touchstone, I'm going on what I get from general discussions. But I just wanted to put in my own confusion with seeing it up front and the idea of it being an appendix, if not removed.
I also think it is a great. I think we are going to continue work on it, and so that's definitely we are completely in agreement on there. I also agree that it's better at the end, but since people on the list felt about it and it kept on coming back, Stephen said though, let's see how it looks when you put it in front and see if it works. So I think it was Joe and Stephen that felt about it. If they look at it now and Stephen and or Joe feel like, meh, back at the end, then I think then we would make everyone happy, but it would be interesting to see what Stephen says.
Aubrey, with a question, how many people have read the 3 bis? I know no one's read the 4, but and have read that that model for considerations at the beginning. Has anyone? There's 2 of us. So I guess I'll just ask in the abstract. I assume many of you have followed that discussion, and it does offer a model of what considerations might be. Obviously, considerations would be something that came out of the IETF, not out of the research group, but the research group could offer a model of here's an idea to think about. And so therefore, I think the programmer using them is much less a consideration at this point than then, so the putting them at the beginning, because a statement I had a little bit of problem with, no programmer is going to read this whole document on human rights. I found that a little difficult to accept. I'm sure some will, but putting it at the end, or perhaps even putting it in appendix. I don't know if any of you have a view on it, but I'd like to hear if you do, even not having read it, knowing the kind of thing that it is. Nope. Okay.
I guess we feel stronger about this than anyone else.
Right, and yeah.
Which is understandable, right? Because kind of married to it.
So on this one, I don't see a push for moving it to another document.
No.
I think we're down to perhaps you and I coming
And
to
Stephen and Joe.
Stephen and Joe coming to is it an appendix or is it section 2?
And maybe we should ask, maybe if Stephen is still there, we should ask, maybe Stephen has a feeling about it.
Yeah.
Stephen, does it look better at the beginning or was the end better? You could tip the scale. You can have some real influence here.
Stephen Farrell said before that he didn't have time to read 04, of course, but reading the diff of the between the two drafts, I do think I'll end up preferring the 04 when considering the readers.
So he likes
But I've yet to read.
Okay.
It's Andrew Sullivan. So because I woke up at 5 this morning, I did have time to read the 04. My feeling actually is that the moving of this vastly improves the document for most of the target readers. So I think it's way better.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
So I will accept that as, unless anyone else thinks different, I'll accept that as the point of view, and that's a non-action on that one. Thank you.
I'll accept that too.
As I say, I was trying to keep my opinion sort of out of it, and that's why I went to the microphone. Okay, so just before we move on from that, I've got 3 of these out of the 5 that require basically further language work, and that's the anonymity issue, that we need something that captures the subtlety of the issue being made there. The discussion about neutrality, basically giving perhaps a little bit on the notion of, not value neutral can mean that the value is neutrality. And one way to say neutrality is indeed not negative, so perhaps that, of course, it's not negative or positive, but in any sense. So I'm smoothing on the language of that. And on the internationalization, basically a little language clarification on that particular issue. But then, what I'd like to ask then, and perhaps that's with next steps, is, and from these issues, from issues that were read in 3 bis, or the one person that read 4, is there anything else that people would see as blocking taking this to research group last call? I don't see anything, but I just wanted to make sure that no one else has a burning issue that they think should block it. As I say, I'm going to try and get this read by a larger part of the human rights community and some of the academic community that deals with these things, to get an outside view on it. So research group last call is spreading out on a more global sense. But does anybody have any other blocking issue that once these 3 things are taken care of, and won't do another review on these 3 things, people can then review these 3 things within the research group last call to see if we got it correct. But I'll work. I think I understand what people are saying. I wouldn't swear to it, but I think I understand what people are saying, so I can work with you to try and get language that deals with it, although you could probably do it even by yourself. But anyway.
What I propose I do is that I think I understand this issue well, and while they're still fresh, mostly better to rework it. So I'll push another version tonight.
Okay.
And then if people feel strongly, come back to the list or meet in person, and we can hammer out some new text. Often that goes easier and quicker than than having 10 back and forths on the list. So you can see and find a new version tonight, the 05, and feel free to come up to me or to post suggestions on the list.
And all things being equal, I'll start the last call after this week. Okay, anything else on that? Well, I guess there's next steps now, but we were kind of like next steps.
Yeah.
Anything else that should be next steps before sending this out? Really trying to get, you know, a solid document that most of us can live with, even, I mean, as a research document. So, no? Okay, great. If something occurs, please let me know. Please put it on the list. If there is any other, you know, blocking item that you think of. But I think that from following the conversations, most of the items that we're blocking have been hit, and this discussion basically dealt with the last three that need a little bit of refinement still. Okay? Great.
Excellent. Very exciting.
Thank you. And thanks for the constant revision.
And Corinne as well, even though her audio is failing. I'm sorry, but Corinne is doing at least, is doing more than I do probably.
Okay, so you had the next item too. I can add a little, but it's mostly you.
So keep on talking.
Have some water first. Yeah.
It's often good to see, to discuss items not in isolation, but see how other internet governance bodies, and I already saw some discussion on the chats, like is the IRTF or IETF an internet governance body? Well, it probably depends on how wide or narrow your discussion on internet governance is. But I'd like to just quickly give an overview together with Corinne on human rights, how they are dealt with in other processes, and especially in ICANN and IEEE.
Corinne says that she wants to try speaking again. Maybe it will work this time.
Excellent. Corinne, come in.
All right, let's see if this works. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. Wow,
And
so
it's,
good.
And
Yeah.
it's not breaking up. Great. Yeah, so as Niels mentioned, it's good to get a bit of a lay of the land. And so some of the other things we've been doing actually is working with the IEEE, who've set up a global initiative for ethical considerations, specifically in the design of autonomous systems and artificial intelligence.
Corinne?
Yes.
Corinne? I have a
Yes.
slide on the IEEE a bit later. Is it okay if I quickly do a first intro and then
Yeah,
we
sure,
do the
go ahead.
IEEE then? Yeah?
Sounds perfect.
Okay. Okay, sorry. And if there's anything that you would like to add on the draft, now we got your audio fixed. I guess you have been able to follow the discussion.
I could follow the discussion, so I think that's all pretty much clear. I just made notes, and I think we have a very clear path forward in terms of how to integrate those.
Cool. Here we go. Human rights started pretty much off in 1947 with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, drafted by a drafting committee in the UN General Assembly under the lead of Eleanor Roosevelt. Was adopted, but much to the chagrin of some of the parties, it was not a binding treaty. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is an aspirational document and is not a binding document. This only changed later when the text got codified into specific treaties, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and other treaties. And only then they became part of international law. So it's great to understand that these, well, yeah, let's make a quick jump ahead and again, not discuss the whole history of human rights, but discuss it where it becomes more relevant for us when it comes to computers and the internet. Then let's go to the World Summit on Information Societies, which was first held in Geneva and then in Tunis. And in the Tunis agenda, we have one of the first texts on internet governance that mentions human rights. So point 42 says, we reaffirm our commitment to the freedom to seek, receive, impart, and use information, which is a direct copy-paste from Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But there we have some qualifying text at the end. Blah, blah. It is balanced against cybercrime and counter spam, respect the provisions for privacy and freedom of expression contained in the relevant parts. And that is always a bit lawyer weasel words, because everyone can say that's relevant. No, it's not relevant. So the relevant part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is again an aspirational document and not a binding document. So this was still relatively weak text. Then the UN Human Rights Council in 2012, in the kind of landmark resolution, said that it affirms that the same rights that people have online must also be protected online, which is a bit of a no-brainer, but it kind of signaled that the Human Rights Council understood that we needed to think about how human rights offline would be translated to the online environment. And we did not completely understand it, but they said they're definitely applicable. So let's try to understand how. Well, then Snowden and the UN General Assembly had a resolution on the protection of privacy in the digital age, and point 4 called upon all states to respect and protect the right to privacy, including in the context of digital communication, to take measures and seek to review their procedures, practices, and legislation. And from that moment on, it was the start of the establishment of a special rapporteur on privacy, and Joe Kanatachi is currently that special rapporteur. Now we've only been looking at intergovernmental processes, but it has not only been discussed in intergovernmental processes, there's also been the Net Mundial meeting, which was held in May or June 2014, which was a multi-stakeholder conference where the technical community, civil society, academia, governments on equal footing were able to work on a document, and that document said human rights as reflected in the UDHR should underpin internet governance principles, but it's not only citing these the aspirational documents, but also the treaties that make it international law. So here you see increasing text, it's repeating itself, but it's getting stronger every time, bit by bit. So also the offline and online is repeated here again. So you see it's a building that's slowly developing. Then the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, David Kay, in his 2015 report said governments should promote the use of strong encryption and protect anonymous expression online. So this is one of the points where the UN Special Rapporteur was really explicit about anonymity. And in his 2016 report, he talked about intermediary liability and private entities that should ensure the greatest possible transparency in their policies and should also understand their impact on human rights and integrate their commitments into their policy-making processes. And that is roughly where we are now in terms of the discussion. The upcoming report of the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression is going to be on telcos, intermediaries, and standards bodies. The official deadline is over, but I know he's still accepting submissions. So if you have interest to do so, please do, because all the submissions are really used by the UN Special Rapporteur. So where does that leave us? Because the only parties to international treaties are governments. So how does that work for these private parties that the UN Special Rapporteur mentioned? Well, we are not the first ones to ask this question, and that's good. Initially, we had the UN Global Compact, which was launched in 2001, which gave rise to the term corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility was still quite a vague term. It tried to translate human rights to non-state actors, but in a quite vague way without very clear guidelines. So it could be on the one hand doing some very bad things, on the other hand building a school and you would be good. So that was still so vague that we couldn't really work with it, and it got a lot of flag. But then in 2011, under the lead of John Ruggie, the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights were developed. And because it was authored by John Ruggie, they're also often referred to as the Ruggie Principles. And the Ruggie Principles have 3 different pillars. The 3 different pillars are the responsibilities for states to protect human rights, so to go out and enforce. For non-state actors to respect human rights. That means within your own work and within your own supply, like trying to understand, know and show your impact on human rights and mitigate adverse impacts on human rights. And the 3rd pillar, a remedy. So if something negative happens, ensure that you allow for models of redress. So this is whistleblower policies, information policies, compensation policies, and ensure that you work with rule of law. So how does this translate to internet governance areas? Well, there is the example of ICANN, where during the phase of the transition that now all ended, a commitment to respect human rights was added to the ICANN bylaws. But Article 4 of ICANN's Articles of Incorporation already said that ICANN would benefit of the internet community as a whole, but also act in conformity with relevant principles of international law and international conventions. But it never really made explicit how it would do this. So now there is the human rights bylaw, which is subject to the limitations set forth in section 27.2, which will come up after this, within the scope of its mission and other core values, respecting internationally recognized human rights as required by applicable law. This is one of the core values of ICANN. It makes it very clear it's not set out to enforce. What does section 27.2 say? This bylaw is an inactive bylaw until we have developed a framework of interpretation, which is part of workstream 2, which is the process of implementing the promises that were made before the transition. So that is the process where we are now. So the plans to improve this have been done on the cross-community working group on accountability. We have had the IANA stewardship transition. Right now we're developing the framework of interpretation, and once that is done, we'll start implementing the human rights bylaw. So this scary dendrogram, which could be in a bit higher resolution for the projector, but which can also be found at icanhumanrights.net, shows maps a bit the different rights that are impacted by ICANN and how the different policies and topics relate to that. So as you can see, there is quite a lot, and currently we're trying to develop that framework of interpretation, but the framework of interpretation is solely an explanation of the bylaw, and it's not a framework of implementation yet. So it's not clear yet how ICANN will respect human rights, but we're also making some suggestions for the implementation of that. So currently there are different processes in ICANN ongoing. As you know, ICANN is a bit more, has bodies for the different constituencies. So we see that there's a lot of interest in different constituencies and supporting organizations. So we have the governments who are working in the Governmental Advisory Committee in their working group on human rights and international law. There's the cross-community working group on accountability, workstream 2, the human rights subgroup that's currently designing the framework of interpretation. I think they are now at the stage where there is a consensus text on the framework of interpretation and draft text on the next steps. And then there is and this is going to be quite a mouthful, the cross-community working party on ICANN's corporate and social responsibility to respect human rights, which is tying together all the discussions and trying to further the discussions with research, which is an informal research group. who have been doing work on see how can this this commitment to respect human rights actually be implemented, and how can this be done. So there's never a dull moment. The discussion on human rights, this is an analysis we made of language, human rights language on mailing lists with the aforementioned Big Bang. There's really a shift from language that says freedom of speech and fair use to a much more human rights language around diversity, human rights, privacy, security, due process, discrimination, but also cultural rights are increasingly being discussed. So that was roughly the work as it's going on in ICANN. Want to discuss that, or also now go into the IEEE?
And then
Okay, Corinne, this is your moment.
Hi, I hope you can hear me now. So the
Still can.
IEEE is, you can or you cannot?
We still can quite clearly, please.
Great, excellent. So the IEEE has recently started a new initiative called the Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in the Design of Autonomous Systems, which includes both a little bit of artificial intelligence and robotics. And the idea behind it is to make sure that every technologist is actually sort of educated, trained, and empowered to be able to see what kind of ethical considerations rise up in the design and development of AI and IS and address those. And in parallel with this particular effort, I'll go into it a little bit more. And the idea is they're going to put out a long form document that sort of addresses all the different issues that might come up. The work is done in different committees, and the first version of this document should be out by December this year. And in parallel to the work on this document, which is more oriented towards, for instance, trying to figure out what are the different sort of ethical issues that arise, where in the work stream do they arise, who should be made responsible for being able to address them, etc. They have also set up the P7000, which is a process for sort of addressing ethical concerns during system designs, which is hopefully going to be an IEEE standard. And the idea behind that is that engineers and other project stakeholders need to actually have a clear methodology for trying to identify and also mitigate sort of ethical concerns of end users at the beginning of systems and software life cycles. And so there's some sort of link to what we're doing here, only their view is a little bit broader at ethics as a whole, but human rights, and especially those as laid out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, play a big role in this as a very clear standard in which to sort of anchor what we should be discussing and how we should benchmark what we consider to be also ethical concerns. So that's pretty much all I have on that.
Great, thank you, Corinne. So basically, I'd like to open, well, the mics are always open, kind of, if anybody's standing, but like to ask if anyone would have questions on either of these two, or want to, speak about work that they're involved in elsewhere, if anyone is involved in anything that's related to this in other areas, just to sort of build that larger picture of the context this work is being done in. But if not, we'll move on. I just was hoping that we would have that context, and want to thank Corinne and Niels for doing that. Okay?
Okay.
Moving on then.
So because everyone is so excited, we'll do ITU next time, okay?
Okay, so moving on takes us to the first one, where I had asked at the beginning whether anyone had any draft papers or ideas that they wanted to add to what all we're talking about at the moment. So please come up to the mic if you do.
Hi, this is Shane Kerr. So is there appetite for digging a little bit deeper into this problem of defining anonymity and how it can be sliced and diced? And would this be an appropriate research group for such a document?
I would think so, if the research group was interested. And it's one of the things that perhaps we could put under the next steps.
Because it was an item of some discussion
Yeah.
earlier, and it seems like people are interested and have ideas about how it can be.
Is it something
this
you're interested in
document.
writing on?
I don't know yet. I got like 2 hours of sleep last night. So,
I understand that.
But I would be willing to discuss it if other people want to come and grab me, and I'll probably send something to the list later.
Great, thanks. Good point. So unpacking anonymity essentially.
Stephen Farrell said that this research group would be, because this is not only a crypto problem, assuming qualified folks with cycles exist. General problem is the IETF.
Yeah, I think Stephen's comment's really good, because I think a crypto discussion would not be there are many great fora to discuss crypto, but of course we need to leech of a lot of crypto people to get there. But
no, I mean, I think, like in security, it's not a crypto discussion. Likewise, anonymity, while there are cryptographic elements of the problem, it's probably a small piece of the overall landscape, right?
yeah, no, I'd love to dig into it, but
Okay.
it's going to be hard, but it's going to be fun because it's hard. It's not.
Well, you're
reason to
almost
not
done
do
with
it.
this other document. So,
Right, yeah.
I mean, I thought you were almost done a year ago, so I don't know.
Almost done is one of those asymptotic states that one stays in for quite a while getting to done.
We're well into Zeno's paradox territory. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of other, there was a couple steps that we're suggesting, which is elaborate human rights impact assessment of one protocol. So pick a protocol and basically using the questions and the analysis that was made, basically try to do a human rights impact assessment of it, see what we get to, see what kind of problems we have in terms of doing it, what kinds of clarities. Try to use this document somewhat as a basis for actually then doing an impact assessment. These human rights impact assessments are very often the step that comes between having come up with a work and having implemented it, and when you do the implementation. And one of the things that's also good, and we could look at, is a protocol that has been implemented, because one of the questions Stephen was asking about various issues, is that in the protocol or is that in the implementation? Is that in the deployment? So an impact assessment of something that's running, that's existing, that's a solid standard, could indeed help us to really understand those questions and how that works. So that's one of the things that we think is within the charter that we've got set up, and takes this work to a next step beyond just a theoretical look at it.
And
Please.
And another different thing of how it would be then in the current draft is that a human rights impact assessment always starts from the rights holders. So whereas we now have been looking mostly at we've started from the protocol side, this would be starting at the users, at the user level. So we would define several use cases of users, and then see how their concrete rights are impacted by the protocol. So it would be working the other way around, which would take quite a little bit of time because we would need to carefully choose and define the use cases. And of course, there are many internet users, especially if we talk about protocols that are widely deployed. So then we would need to write a justification for the case selection, properly describe the case, and then make the links between the rights impacted and the protocol, which will also be not, because attribution is hard, right? And it's going to also be different layers of the stack that are interplaying, but it might be a good step to give such a full road testing, which we would not expect from protocol developers, but to give, like, if you want to do it super thorough, this is what it would look like. And if you think this is relevant, then I'd also be very interested to hear what protocols you think would be most worthwhile to do this.
Anyone have any comment on this first possibility? Good idea, not good idea, ideas on a protocol? No comment yet. Sitting there is kind of like no comment yet. Okay, let's talk about the second one then, and we can come back to these and certainly come back to them on the list because these are just ideas at this point. How is the right to free association either sustained by or not sustained by internet architectures? Considering the difference between federation versus centralization. This has been one of the subtexts to a lot of discussion on protocols, on networks, on the internet versus other networks for a very long time. And also freedom of association is one of the two rights that we set up at the beginning to pay some attention to. And while it got some coverage in the current document in general, actually it's one that has not been delved into very much and yet is a critical right. And it is a critical right that the internet contributes to. So do you want to add any further substance on it, Niels?
No, maybe the Jabber scribe wants to reflect a bit on what's going on in the chat. No. So I think what's going on there is like this has very much to do with the discussion on protest, and can you do what kind of protests are there? Okay, sorry. Yeah, because this just to counter that idea, right, that didn't go there was that protest would only be, there's lots of association on the internet that has absolutely nothing to do with protest, but it's cultural and identity. So just to that. Okay, and then any comment on that one before I move on? Don't see any. And then continuing to get speakers to bridge divides between communities. One of the things that, hadn't necessarily been planned when we put together the group, but which seems to have been successful, and I want to check to what degree others agree, is having people in with diverse views on technology and human rights, on work being done elsewhere, and those discussions. Sometimes we have agreed with them, sometimes we haven't, sometimes we've been split along the lines, but I think all of them have, at least to me, given new points of view, new ways of looking at the issue that I often hadn't thought of. So that's one of the things that we've thought of, basically, is one of the things that we will continue doing, but also wanted to check and see whether others thought those were worthwhile. I have an impression that people do, because when I said we would spend this meeting only doing draft work, I got a certain amount of pushback saying, no, the other stuff is good too, and just draft work would be boring. So I had a certain amount of pushback saying, yes, that those things are not boring and good to have, but just want to, check the general feeling on that. Yeah, and unfortunately we had selected 2 speakers who were willing to speak, but then when the time zone and our meeting slot came out, they canceled because it was in the middle of the night. And the 2 replacement speakers that we found seem to have had the same problem, but which had been good because we officially had up to 11, but we have the room, so let's continue a bit. So
I don't understand the problem with giving speeches in the middle of the night. It's just it's becoming a pattern in my life. It's becoming a pattern in my life.
Stefan Bartsmeyer speaking. I've always said that we should not spend the whole time of the meetings working on draft, but for me this is exactly what the IETF and IRTF is about. So I think that having speakers and explaining or one point or the other that we don't know, it's a very good thing, but it should be a limited time in the meetings, because most of the meetings should be spent on what we are trying to do, produce documents. So IETF or IRTF is not a place for, it's at a university, it's not a goal. So okay, but not too many.
Thank you.
Marco Hoogwaning speaking in personal capacity. I second Stefan here. I think it can help to have speakers there, especially when the speaker is focusing on the work being done. But I think the work itself should focus on draft recommendations. This shouldn't be a platform for advocacy. Then you should talk about getting the speakers into technical plenary or something. But do the work in the working group with the objective of creating the documents if external speakers help, it might be worthwhile, but it shouldn't be an objective by itself.
Okay, thank you. Any other objectives? Any other things other than the anonymity one that was already?
So
I have that one down.
This
but
is
yes.
Shane Kurgan. Just to respond to my colleagues here, this is a research group, right? So I think we have a bit more flexibility to do whatever we think is going to lead us to interesting results, which aren't necessarily just producing documents. So mostly because I really liked a few of the presentations earlier. So
Yeah, no, as I say, opening a point of view was more, I wasn't thinking of it as university so much as point of view expansion. Yes, Stefan.
No, it's the next step. Relaying Stephen Farrell. Now that we all realize that DDoS is an attack on only an attack, would anyone be interested in trying to write something about how one can protest on the internet without that being an attack? Would there be any benefit in there listing some examples of non-attack forms of protest, for instance?
Interesting. What do others think? Certainly can add it to the considerations of looking at. Not quite sure how it fits, but it's probably worth looking at in terms of, you know, human rights. Okay, protest is part of a human right. You know, the ability to assemble and protest is a human right. So perhaps looking at how one can express that on the internet without attack may indeed be a useful exercise. Does Stephen bringing it up mean it's something that he's interested in exploring with others? I mean, the moral equivalent of what you say is, what do we want? X. When do we want it? Now. Yes. Okay. And yeah. Okay. Any other?
Yes,
yes,
another point. At what time we had on the table for this research group a draft on the censorship technologies, which in my opinion was quite advanced, but seems now stalled. That's a problem because, of course, in this area, the technologies change. So the longer we wait, the less interesting it is. I have the feeling that the original author is no longer working on it. Yes, it was draft all censorship tech. So is there any interest in reviving it, maybe moving to another author if you find a volunteer? Joe, the original author, isn't here. So is there some interest here? Are there people who think that it would be a good idea to publish this as a RFC and then people volunteer to work on it? Open question.
Do you know what Joe's up to?
I do know that Joe has been in a car accident, but he's okay relatively, but was unable to come here. He is quite busy though, but I fully agree that we should get this to RFC stage because I use this a lot as a reference document myself. It's a really good document. I do not see why we shouldn't get there. So if we as a research group can relay to Joe, let's get this going, and let's see what do you need to help this to the next level. Do you need more co-authors? What do you need? Then I think that would be a great message.
One message from Stephen Farrell, which is relevant. Joe Hall has the censorship internet draft in work. We plan an update, and I plan to AD sponsor. So hopefully soon in the IETF.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is no longer related to this point, so unless somebody else has anything to bring. No, just Marco, again, speaking personal capacity, I'm not sure whether it's been brought up in IRTF or IETF context, but I do know that in our community, the RAP community, there is a bit going on regarding the possible impact of internet measurements, and for instance, the ethical dimensions that you get there in protecting hosts, participating in measurements, etc. I'm not volunteering myself, but that might be something to keep on the list for this group as well, to sort of get a general framework of what goes on there.
Okay, thank you. I actually want to add something that we didn't get on our list, and that's to take the model that we've included in this current one